At this moment, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome to the stage Ambassador João Mendes, Consul General of Brazil in Miami.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Ambassador Chapman, it's an honor to have you here. Carlos, prazer tê-lo aqui. It's a great pleasure and honor to welcome you here today to attend our event, Invest in Brazil, Real Estate Market Private Equity, Miami Edition. This is an excellent opportunity to discuss trends and showcase great opportunities in the Brazilian real estate market, covering tourism, hospitality, commercial, residential, logistics, industrial, and private equity real estate. I also want to welcome our renewed speakers. We will have our Minister of Economy, Paulo Guedes, Mr. Diogo McCord, Economy Deputy Minister of Brazil, Mr. Carlos Costa, Economy Deputy Minister of Brazil, our always U.S. Ambassador in Brazil, Mr. Todd Chapman, Mr. Fiuza, Business Director of ApexBrasil. It's a great time to invest in Brazil real estate market. The event today is another trade and investment promotion initiative by the North American Office of Apex in Brazil, with the institutional support of the Consulate General of Brazil in Miami. I hope it will build more bridges connecting opportunities between the two most dynamic free economies in the hemisphere. Our combined effort, strong alliance, and work ethic has permitted to achieve great results and increased trade and investment flow between the two nations, the United States of America and Brazil. Let's improve this effort. I would like to express here my sincere wish for an extraordinary day for everyone present. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Consul. I'd like to welcome now Todd Chapman, U.S. Ambassador to Brazil.
Good morning, everyone. What a great honor it is to be here. Thank you, Ambassador, for hosting. Really great to be here. General with Apex, wonderful to see you. Secretary, nice to meet you here. And what a pleasure as the former U.S. Ambassador to Brazil to be participating in this conference. You know, investment is one of those issues that brings countries together. And it's wonderful when you see U.S. investment bringing about great opportunities in other countries. Over my 30-year diplomatic career, I got to see this on several continents, and certainly got to see this in Brazil. And so it's wonderful and truly an honor to have been invited to participate in this event today. You know, over 400 of the Fortune 500 US companies are invested and present in Brazil. And 400 of the 500 Fortune 500 companies can't be wrong. They have to know something that is important to them and their financial interests, which is it's important to be invested in Brazil because it's a great market, it's a growing market, and it's one that continues to provide fantastic opportunities for US business to grow and expand. That is why in the last 4 years, venture capital in the United States going into Brazil, according to the Latin America Venture Capital Association, has doubled every year, including during COVID. So there's a reason for that, because there are opportunities to be found. And so I think that one of the reasons that's happening has to do with the deregulation effort that's going on in Brazil. The Bolsonaro administration and its financial team, led by Minister Guedes, by Central Bank President Roberto Campo, and by people here today, are leading a truly important effort to make Brazil an increasingly business-friendly locale. And I had the privilege, while serving as ambassador for the last year and a half until July, to work with a number of investors and investment firms from the United States who were either greatly increasing investment or were dipping their toe in the water for the first time. And I think I can speak for Brazil, both are welcome. And this is a great event to introduce some of you to what those opportunities might be in the real estate sector. So one of the things that surprised me during my year and a half as ambassador in Brazil, and I had worked in Brasilia for 3 years prior as the number 2 at the embassy, is I do not recall, I was thinking about this morning, I don't recall one case where my office that talked about expropriation, a real estate investment gone bad because the licensing wasn't done right, or something like that. I can tell you in every other of the 8 countries I'd been assigned to, that crossed my desk. It didn't once in Brazil. Doesn't mean it didn't happen, but it's truly remarkable. American investors in Brazil are very happy. So what is the challenge, I think, for real estate investing in Brazil? And again, there are challenges. I think what I heard most frequently from US-based investors was currency risk, because it's very difficult to hedge for a multi-year project. And that is a risk that you have to get comfortable with somehow. So I remember having breakfast one morning in São Paulo with the CEOs in Brazil of 3 of our largest US investors. And I asked them, how do you deal with currency risk? He said, it's relatively easy. We stay. We stay. We're here for the long term. And so they said, some years we show a great profit on currency exchange. Some years we show a loss, but over time, we're making a lot of money in Brazil, and that's why we keep investing. American companies, according to the Central Bank of Brazil, the value of their investments in Brazil is $145 billion. And one of the reasons that number is so large is that American companies that are making money in Brazil, they retain their earnings and reinvest in Brazil. And that is a major source of the continued growth in US investment. So I think that is one of the risks that has to be entertained and figured out, is how do you deal with currency risk as an investor? But many have gone before you and many have figured it out. Some of the areas I think that are particularly attractive is high-end tourism in Brazil. This is something that I saw during the COVID problems, is many Brazilian travelers discovered their own tourist treasures in Brazil, from the Pantanal to new beaches, to Santa Catarina, up to Natal. And many Brazilians who would tell me, wow, we're rediscovering our country because we didn't fly to Florida this year. And so I think tourism offers something really interesting. I think high-end retail, commercial kind you see in many US cities are ripe for being replicated in many Brazilian cities. And I've gotten a number of inquiries over the last couple of years about specialty real estate investing, whether it's in senior homes or things that we have in the US that haven't quite taken in Brazil. But all of this is to say that I think this is a great time to be taking a look at Brazil. And again, I want to commend the Brazilian government for the approach it has taken to open up and change some fundamental rules that I think are going to be really helpful for the US. There are a lot of us cheering for you. We want this to succeed. It builds relationships when countries are investing in one another. Again, Mr. Ambassador, it's wonderful to be with you today. Thank you so very much. I wish you a good day.
Thank you very much. And I believe now we have a brief message from Miami Mayor Francis Suarez.
This is Mayor Miami Francis. I'm sorry to be able to be first, but I'm honored to be able to speak first. I'd like to thank ApexBrasil and Embassador João Mendes for hosting and organizing Invest in Brazil Miami Beach. And I'd like to send my warm regards to all those here today. There is no better place than in Miami, but Brazil is, of course, a home center. In all seriousness, Miami's Brazilian population is a large part of what makes this city so colorful and vibrant. Another part of what makes Miami and Brazil such a successful. We understand our cultures and we understand each other. During this past year, the city of Miami has grown. We've been ranked the #1 seed in the U.S. for tech jobs, #1 seed in the U.S. for tech migration. We hosted Miami's first ever Bitcoin conference. In addition to all of this, we have continued to make robust investments and sustainability. I was blessed to be re-elected again this past November by close to 80% of our voters. And this coming January, I will be inaugurated as president of the U.S. Company. I promise to do everything in my power to pull Miami into the capital of capital and create a city for everyone and a city that lasts forever. Thank you so much for having me today and enjoy it.
Thank you, Mayor. I love Miami. We'd like to invite Mr. Lucas Fiuza, ApexBrasil Business Director, for his opening words.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank you all for being here today, present here today. Finally, I'd like to thank you, Ambassador João Mendes, Ambassador Todd Chapman, Deputy Ministers Diogo, Carlos, all the amazing Apex team, and especially all of you entrepreneurs and investors that are here attending this conference today with us. It's an honor to represent ApexBrasil, the agency that promotes exports and attracts investments all over the world for Brazil, and has been providing an excellent work in next year for 25 years, doing the promotion of exports, internationalization of Brazilian companies, and attraction of foreign direct investment. This forum, is a great opportunity to disclose you the truth directly from primary source about the new Brazil that is already delivered, and it's a scenery that the market didn't value properly yet. So I'm going to present a short institutional video. There is going to have a quick overview about what I'm saying, but I'm not going to spoil the presentation of my colleagues that are going to go in detail in a more structured way about this new structural changes that we had in Brazil. Please, if you can run the video, please.
The result of sustainable economic growth, people, prosperity, lives, and free to serve happiness and accomplishment. Natural resources, a strong and stable institutional backbone, infrastructure, settled economic freedom, a mature democracy, and scale in population and territory. Fundamental elements to be competitive and take the path to prosperity. Investment as a nation worldwide. The structural reforms already delivered and eagerly awaited by entrepreneurs from all over, as well as the progress of the largest concession program of the private partnership history are paving the path to prosperity, making Brazil more free, competitive, and safe. The pension reform will relieve the government $150 billion in the first 10 years. Now, everyone has the organizations are private firms. Reduced bureaucracy will create 1.7 billion jobs. Less bureaucracy to get permits, licenses, open new companies, and for international trade, among many other benefits. Free from future political interference is placing Brazil alongside the most in the world. The government simplify the rules for capital market according to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development that will have a positive impact of up to $30 billion for investment. With the new legal framework for export processing zones, Brazil reaches the successful experiences of China and the United States, attracting innovation, jobs, and boosting exports. As the world's seventh largest oil producer, we will reach the fourth place by 2030 with the market. The new legal framework for natural gas will create up to $12 billion in investments. And we also started the privatization process of electrical gas, whose capitalization is already approved by the national governments. We will reach 99% of the population, a historic achievement for the country, representing investments from 94 to $1 billion, which are already being provided by concessions to the private sector. The legal framework for startups facilitates hiring by the public administration, provides legal security for entrepreneurs and investors, and creates a regulatory environment, the sandboxes, that will allow Brazil to have one of the largest innovation ecosystems in the world. Brazil is living in the world. It is the country market of the crisis, that includes investors and entrepreneurs will seize opportunities and prosper in Brazilian economy. Brazil is open for business, and ApexBrasil is the business one-stop shop ready to serve.
Thank you. It is the country and the market of today. We are already in a virtuous cycle. We are already in the path to prosperity. We're open for business, and ApexBrasil is here to serve you all that are interested in prosper with us. Thank you very much.
There you go. Thank you very much. That was a great video. And this concludes our opening ceremony. But for our first topic this morning, which will present Brazil's economic agenda, I would like to invite our keynote speaker, Paulo Guedes, Minister of Economy of Brazil. And I believe he's connecting with us through Zoom. Paulo Guedes received a PhD in economics from the University of Chicago. He was a professor of the Pontifical Catholic University in Rio de Janeiro, also referred to as PUC-RG, Rio de Janeiro, the Getúlio Vargas Foundation, and the National Institute for Pure and Applied Mathematics. He's the founder of Banco Pactual, Abril Educação, the university's IBMEC, and the founder of the Millennium Institute. Ladies and gentlemen, Paulo Guedes.
Good morning, friends. Ambassador João Mendes, Ambassador Todd Chapman, Mayor Suarez, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to begin talking specifically about one issue where the noise of politics is distorting the facts, distorting reality. So we know that all information has signal, which is the real thing, and noise, which is just noise. So the first fact I would like to reassure to you is that fiscal sustainability in Brazil is preserved. It is very important because there was a lot of noise about Brazil losing control of the fiscal policy, Brazil being a victim of fiscal populism. And I'll give you facts, numbers. When we got here, public expenditures as a ratio of GDP was around 19.5%, 20% of GDP. As soon as we got here, our targets were exactly the lack of control over public expenditures, because this is the number one enemy of the country. Brazil is trapped in a zero growth trap along the last 40 years, 4 decades. For 4 decades, Brazil's growth has been slowing down. Brazil was once the fastest growing economy in the world. It is the first Japanese colony in the world. It is the second colonies of Italian immigrants in the world. It is the third colony of Germans outside of Germany in the world. And we have more Lebanese in Brazil than in Lebanon itself. Brazil used to grow for 2, 3, 4 decades around 7.3, 7.4% a year, attracting people from all over the world. But then suddenly, we began losing our path to prosperity, our road to prosperity. As a coincidence, it was since we began with the planning minister. When we did not have planning ministers, when we had a market economy, Brazil used to grow faster than most economies in the world, more than Korea, Japan, USA, Germany, and so on. So what happened in Brazil in the 4 last decades, that public expenditures began growing from 18% of GDP 4 decades ago to 22 at the end of the military government, 26, 30, 36, 40, and a few years ago, at the peak of Dilma government, we reached 45% of GDP. So the government was spending too much and unwisely. Our diagnosis was exactly to promote a transition in the Brazilian economy in direction of a market economy. So we merged 5 ministers: finance, planning, industry and commerce, social security, Ministry of Work. We put everything in one Ministry of the Economy. We used to spend 15 billion reais a year. We now have one minister spending 10 billion. So we shaved 5 billion, 1/3 of expenditures, giving an example of how the music would play from now on. At the same time, we began attacking each one of these uncontrollable expenditures. The first one, in the first year of the government, was the Social Security reform. A lot of skepticism about our capability of doing the reform, but millions of Brazilians on the streets supporting the reform. At the same moment that millions of people were in the streets of France against a social security reform, democracy was surprising the world. There was a lot of skepticism about Bolsonaro's government because we did not have political support at the beginning. But the fact is that the very first year, we made a very important reform, removing the privileges of the Social Security in Brazil. The government is a factory of privileges, and we are removing them. So we shaved 100 billion a year of privileges in expenditures. We put under control the future path of expenditures with social securities. They were around 700 billion every year and growing up at 20, 30 billion every year. We shaved off 100 billion every year in a 1 trillion reform for the next 10 years. The second major expenditures were interest payments. Brazil was the paradise of rent seekers, and it was hell for entrepreneurs. Interest rates for decades, 1, 2, 3 decades of double-digit interest rates. So we attacked these expenditures on 2 bases. First, changing the doses of fiscal and monetary policy. We always had a loose fiscal policy trying to restrain inflation just on the back of the central bank. So very high interest rates and snowball indebtedness. We just changed it with a very bright monetary plan, the real plan. We just changed it. The way of financing an uncontrollable public spending. Instead of an inflationary finance, we resorted to a snowball indebtedness. The internal debt just swamped as a ratio of GDP. When we got here, it was 76.5% of GDP. And the first year, we put it down to 5.5. And the first year, we shaved the fiscal deficit, the primary deficit, by half, from 2% to 1% of GDP. But we could not wait 2, 3, 4 years to generate a fiscal surplus to begin putting down the debt GDP ratio. We need to put it down immediately, like we did in the first year, divesting, deleveraging public banks. Unwinding past mistakes, fiscal looseness, and easier money, lower equilibrium interest rates, and also a higher equilibrium exchange rate. So at the same time, instead of having high interest rates and overvalued currency, we went to lower real interest rates and a higher equilibrium exchange rate. So this was our first step to reduce interest payments. And the second and most decisive, the divestment. We sold 240 billion reais of state company subsidiaries that were not focused on the core business. And we sold another 260 billion in financial assets that developing bank, BNDES, and Caixa Econômica, also a state bank, these banks are charging themselves and paying back the union their debts. So they were key in the balance sheet repair of the union strategy. The third major source of public expenditures, until then uncontrollable, was exactly the wage bill of public employees. The wage bill went up and wages went up in the public sector 50% above inflation in the last 17 years before we got here. We even got, in the first year, an obligation to give a wage increase left by the past government. The man who put the ceiling did not apply the ceiling to himself. They gave 3 years in a row of wage increases, including our first year. And then they calculated the ceiling so that they could respect and we would have trouble, which is exactly what we are living now. Nonetheless, we commit ourselves to respect the ceiling and the spending cap. So when we began, in the first year, we made the Social Security reform. We put all the expenditures under control. We began repairing the balance sheet of the union, putting down the interest rate payments. And as soon as we were hit by the COVID, all reforms were postponed. In the very first year, I sent to Congress the Federative Pact with fiscal triggers, and I sent to the executive power the administrative reform. We were then hit by the COVID. Remember that our focus on the first years was to control public expenditures, interest payments, wages, reform, and the Social Security expenditures. So we were hit by COVID. Immediately, we stopped the train, we got off track, and we went in the other direction. Our expenditures increased sharply from 19.5% of GDP to 26.5%. Spent more to save lives and preserve jobs, more than double the average of the emerging economies, and 10% more than the average of the advanced economies. So we spared no money or resources to preserve lives and preserve jobs. We protected 68 million Brazilians, most vulnerable ones, low income, previously under social assistance. The Brazilian population in age of work is 106 million workers, 46 million in the private sector, 40 million invisible ones, informal markets, and 20 million social assistance. So we assisted most vulnerable in social assistance previously, and the invisible ones, the informal workers, people who could not sell bottles of water, people who could not sell at light signs in the streets candies and bottles of water. So we had to protect these people so that they could practice the social that the disease and the pandemic required. Our expenditures jumped to 26% of GDP. But what happened? We made sure all the time that there was a double commitment. On one hand, all the money that helped demands. But on the other hand, we would pay for the war. We would not roll over to the future generations cost of a war. So what happens now? In 2021, our expenditures collapsed from 26.5 to 19.5, exactly where we were before the pandemic hit Brazil. No country in the world has done such a fiscal contraction in 1 year. So fiscal responsibility is a fact on Brazil. All the rest is noise, is false narratives, is politics, is not real world economics. The real facts are our expenditures went from 19.5% GDP before COVID to 26.5 and back to 19.5 this year. And next year, the forecast, initial forecast was 17.5, much less than the year we came here. As the first government that will spend less when we left than when we came to office. The rest is noise, is bullshit, is speculation. Narratives. The facts are we preserve fiscal responsibility. But then another uncontrollable expenditure showed up. I'm not the first finance minister that met the challenge of the judiciary bonds, of the debt orders. All previous finance ministers met them, but they did not provide predictability for the future. So how did we face this challenge? One independent power, which is the legislative, command us to respect the debt ceiling, to respect the spending cap. Another independent power, the judiciary power, command us to provide a minimum income and at the same time to respect the payments of the judiciary bonds or debt orders. I went to the Supreme Court and I went to the legislature and I said, these commands are in disagreement. They are not consistent. If I respect one, I disrespect the other. So the result of our conversations was a constitutional amendment that makes all expenditures coming from the judiciary bonds or debt orders submitted to the ceiling. That's exactly the opposite of people have been saying. They say, well, these guys are defaulting on the debt. It's quite the contrary. In order not to have a default, we are submitting these expenditures to the same ceiling we have to respect. So from now on, you have predictability, previsibility, because now all the uncontrollable, previously uncontrollable expenditures on judiciary bonds, now they're predictable. They respect the ceiling from now on. And whatever excess is left, for instance, when something happened, which is they blow it up They came from 46 billion, 47 billion last year to double to almost 90 billion, 89 billion from one year to the other. This is completely uncontrollable. This is completely unpredictable. This cannot happen because we cannot execute the budget. More than that, we cannot sustain our social programs. More than that, we cannot forecast the future. So the judiciary bonds constitutional amendment, which is just about to be approved, it was approved in the lower house, it was approved in the Senate, and now they both are converging on the final version, should be out in the next, at most at next week. They finally give predictability, transparency, and fiscal responsibility to this previously uncontrollable expenditure. So what happened is exactly the opposite of people are saying. Of course, the major legal and lawyers offices in Brazil and the prime financiers in Brazil will have to help us now, because of instead just prosecuting the union, now we have to respect this. Any excess will be transformed into a menu of 6, 7, 8 possibilities. If you want to receive your money now, instead of just waiting 1 year more, and we pay interest on that, it's like this excess over the ceiling is transformed into debt, but we'll be paying it very soon. As a matter of fact, if you want to receive it today, just go to one of our auctions of oil fields, of airports, of state companies like Eletrobras, the largest electricity generation and transmission power company in Latin America, or show up at our auction of the Postal Service. So help to transform the Brazilian state, help to divest with these judiciary bonds. You can see in the streets, people saying, we buy judiciary bonds, we buy debt orders. There's a market for that in Brazil. So let's put that to work to transform the Brazilian government, instead of just piling up debt in a snowball indebtedness, uncontrollable stream of public expenditures. So we control the 4 largest and fastest growing public expenditures in Brazil. The result, the final result, after the approval of the constitutional amendment, is that instead of dropping from 19.5 this year to 17.5 next year, we'll drop to 18.5. Good enough. So instead of having degree 10, A+ on fiscal, give us A-. But we preserved our social programs, our basic income transfer people, which is the final result. We open fiscal space for that. So the most vulnerable have preference. They receive under the ceiling legal claims. And the most sophisticated, big lawyers firm, great financiers in Brazil, they help Brazil to sell airports. They help Brazil to buy oil fields and divest assets that the government is willing to liquefy. So I think the final result is that our primary deficit, which was 2% when we came here in 2019, we reduced in the first year, 2019, we reduced to a half. We shaved half of it from 2% to 1%. Then it went to 10.5% of GDP in 2020, fighting. the pandemics, but it bounced back to 1% this year. 2021, we will close with 1% of GDP primary deficit. These are facts. These are numbers. The general government, when we consolidate state and municipalities, for the first time since 2013, is going to have a surplus for the very simple reason that we also attacked the increase in the public employees' wage bill. So in the midst of the pandemics, when people are losing their lives, losing their jobs, it doesn't make sense to give wage increases to our public employees at all levels, federal, state, and municipality. So we asked for an interruption of wage readjustments. And we approved that. And the final result at 5,000 Brazilian municipalities and 26 states, the federal district of Brasilia, all of them improved substantially their financial positions. And now the consolidated government at all three levels and subnational will, for the first time in 8 years, to display a surplus. So how come people are talking about this politics? It is noise. It is disrespect with the facts, with the fiscal situation in Brazil. So I would like to finish this first observations on the fiscal front, saying that we are committed to fiscal responsibility. We are committed to future generations. And the country bounced back 5% growth this year, respecting fiscal responsibility, respecting the commitment with the future generations, and restraining the debt. Expenditures collapsing from 26 to 19.5, the primary debt 1.5 to 1%. Well, since we were hit by the pandemics, we created more than 3 million jobs. From the bottom to now, we are creating 1,000, 300,000, 200,000 new jobs, formal jobs every month. The employment rate that blowed higher with the pandemics is back to where we were. When we were hit by the pandemics, 2.6%, 2.4%. Now, the last data, last month, 2.6%. So practically the same. Brazil is back on his feet again. And the various predictions and forecasts have failed. People forecast that Brazil GDP would drop 10%. It dropped at 4%, less than Italy, less than Germany, less than Japan, less than France, less than Spain, Portugal. Then they forecast that Brazil would stay in a depression that I was dreaming when I said that Brazil would bounce back in a V-shaped recovery. Well, Brazil executed the V-shaped recovery. GDP is above the level it was when we were hit by the pandemics. And we have grown 5% this year, more than 5%. The same actors that made such wrong, the same people who forecasted that Brazil GDP ratio would reach 100%. Facts, Brazil GDP ratio, GDP debt ratio, debt GDP is now 80%. So 20% less than they forecasted. More than 2.5 trillion reais. So what a big mistake. I hope they bet on their forecasts. I hope they bet against Brazil, because this is not what happened. The debt GDP ratio is 80%. They made a big mistake. They didn't understand what is going on. They're doing politics instead of economics. So what happened this year? As soon as our mass vaccination advanced, Brazil has already protected 97% of its population with the first doses, and 80% of Brazilians are fully vaccinated with the second shot. The disease is, according to the health minister, under control, entirely under control. Brazilians are getting back to work, safe return to work. But most important, our government was probably the only government in the world that was also providing for the structural reforms in the midst of the pandemics. So this year, we approved an independent central bank. For 40 years, all political elections have been distorted by the politicization of monetary policy. For the first year, we have now an independent central bank running a depoliticized monetary policy, an institutional advancement. At the beginning of the also the fiscal triggers. Now, every time a municipality, state, or the federal level hits certain triggers, we have the Brazilian shutdown. The US shutdown, you stop paying. The Brazilian shutdown, you just stop giving increases in expenditures. You don't stop paying, but you stop giving increases. At the same time, we are the fourth largest digital market in the world. We approved the startup regulatory framework. Big, great companies in Brazil and the new digital dimensions are making IPOs even in the NASDAQ in the US, not only here. We also approved the bankruptcy law to help companies that were put down with the disease, helping them to bounce back to business. We approved the privatization of postal service and the Eletrobras, the energy powerhouse of Brazil. We approved new regulatory frameworks for gas, natural gas, oil, cabotage, railroads. Our auctions now are not to increase revenue of the government. Quite the contrary, we want to maximize new investments. So how come people talk about Brazil is not going to grow if we have more than 600 billion, more than $100 billion of commitments signed off already? These are contracts. These are not PowerPoints, intentions, plans. These are contracts, signed contracts. In all these frontiers that we changed the regulatory mark. Just to give you an idea, the details, certainly the president of BNDES will explain. A great job. We transform, they are deleveraging themselves, paying back the union, but at the same time, qualitatively, is an entirely new bank, is an investment bank of the union. It's not an old-fashioned credit bank giving easy money to great companies that don't need official support. Great companies, private companies that can access the capital markets in Brazil. So we have now $1 billion in commitments in all these investment frontier, oil, natural gas, electricity, railroads, seaports, cabotage. So all these contracts guarantee that Brazil is making a successful transition from a cyclical recovery based on income transfers to get Brazil out of the bottom with auxiliary grants and income transfer programs to a sustainable growth process based on private investments. Just to give you an idea, as soon as we approved of the sanitation regulatory framework, just one company, SEDAI, in Rio de Janeiro, water and sewage, mobilized 50 billion reais, more than $8 billion. When the budget for the whole year of the infrastructure ministry is less than 8 billion reais, little more than $1.5 billion. So one private company can mobilize 6 times more than the specialist minister can mobilize. This is just to give you a measure of how powerful is the proposition of taking Brazil to a market economy, decisively, divesting. These state companies must be privatized. It is a cycle that is over, finished. They become targets of political disputes. They become nests of corruption. We must privatize them. Not only they do not have the capability to invest to support future growth, but more than that, they prevent the private investments to come in. So what we are doing is exactly to reducing interest rates, to reduce corporate tax. We sent to the Congress a tax reform proposal. I don't know if it will flow, if it will go ahead. I don't think it will. That's politics. It was approved in the lower house with more than 400 votes, a convergence of our tax system to the global tax systems. We just made and participate actively with Secretary of the Treasury Yellen. We talked 1 hour, one day before the agreement, and 1 hour in the day of the agreement, of the minimum income tax for multinationals, around 15%, and how to distribute the excess among emerging economies. And we got her support for our access to OECD. We talked also to Matthias Cormann, Secretary General of OECD, importance of Brazil joining the OECD. And to join OECD, we must converge to the best practices. And they tax dividends and they lower tax, corporate tax. So Brazil should position itself now to receive investments from all over the world if we go through with the tax reform, which unfortunately has been paralyzed at the Senate in the wrong hands of someone that does not understand a thing about tax reforms. One specific senator. So we are trying to put Brazil in the road to prosperity. We certainly prevented Brazil from going to the road of misery that Argentina was going, and now it's changing, and that unfortunately Venezuela reached already. millions of Venezuelans getting out, flying off the country, which is not a democracy anymore, and which is not a market economy. So our road is quite clear, is in the other direction, privatizing, opening the economy. For the first time, we reduced it since it was founded, the external tariff of Mercosur. Mercosur was created before the Eurozone, before the Euro area, monetary area, before the NAFTA, North American Free Trade Area, before the Pacific Alliance. And what happened? It became a trap. We became prisoners of a closed economy, state-driven. So it's quite clear where we want to go. We want to be a market economy, full-size market economy. Brazil has a lot of resources. It's a new digital revolution in the world. We know the future is green. We know the future is digital. We went to Glasgow with the Green Growth Program, $1 billion mobilizing a green infrastructure for the future. We created, for the first time, a bill in Brazil that guarantees the payment for environmental services. If you preserve a forest, you receive money for preserving environmental services. So we know where the future is. We have our feet on the future. Brazil has the cleanest energy matrix in the world. And we will preserve it like that. We have already 15% of our power generated by wind and solar. So we are in the right road. We need time to make the transformation. Unfortunately, we didn't have political support in the first 2 years. And then we were hit by the pandemics. But we know where we want to be. Brazil is a very well-established democracy against all skepticism. A lot of people saying that Brazilian democracy was at risk. At no moment we were at risk. We surprised the world with important reforms. We surprised the world reacting to the pandemics better than some advanced countries. We vaccinated more our population than some advanced countries. And we are growing. And next year, it is true that we have a great challenge. And I will finish my comments very soon. It is true that we have a great challenge. It is true that inflation is going higher. Inflation in the US was 0. It jumped to 6%. Inflation in Brazil was 4%. It jumped to 10%. So plus 6% by coincidence in the US and here. Well, I think our central bank acted faster and we will control it earlier than most advanced countries. I think inflation will be a big problem for the world in the next 10 years. And I think Brazil is institutionally equipped to fight it faster. And I'll give you a reason for that. There was one theorem in economic theory, which is the Stolper-Samuelson factor price equalization theorem. In the Western world for the last 2 or 3 decades. Even in the US, people are living off capital gains in the stock market. Wages are not going higher in the last 20, 30 years because of this arbitrage. 3.7 billion Eurasians, victims of socialism in Russia, in India, and China. These people are getting out of poverty through globalization, sending the goods and services to the Western world. Coincidence that the Western world was stressed. With the UK leaving the Eurozone, Macron was elected in France, Trump in the US as a reaction to this discomfort 3.7 billion Eurasians getting out of poverty, getting wealthier in India, in Pakistan, in South Asia, Southeast Asia, in China, in Korea, and Japan. They're selling their goods here. The wages are going up there. And there was an enormous economic stress in the Western world. And that inflation was muted by this arbitrage. But go and read The Age of Turbulence of Greenspan. And he was predicting that by the 20s, right now where we are, inflation would skyrocket, particularly in the US, where the baby boomers are retiring. The financial flows from China will be back to China to support their growth, and real interest rates would go higher. And the Federal Reserve would have to be wakened because they are sleeping on the wheel. They're sleeping on the wheel. The inflation is strong and it will last in the US. And I think we are taking care of our fiscal framework to guarantee fiscal control, fiscal responsibility. So, Brazil, take care of yourselves, be responsible, and help us. We will help you too. So let's have a partnership. I think Brazil will have the largest, widest, most diversified investment frontier 10 years. Come, you will be welcome. We are open for business. Help us. Paying attention to the signals, to the real information of the fiscal sustainability, of the transformation of privatizations, of the reforms we are trying to implement. Help us to implement these reforms. Help us to preserve the natural resources we have. And this COP26, we are giving full support to a private carbon market so that not only we tax whoever is polluting the world, and the advanced countries, by far the largest polluter. The US pollutes 14%. Europe pollutes 14, 15%. China pollutes 30%. And Brazil, 1.7%. So we're not that big polluter. But more than that, we want to see the other side. And Matthias Cormann, General Secretary of OCDE, understand this two-pillar system, which is let's pay for those who preserve natural resources. And Brazil is a champion on that. Brazil is the cleanest energy matrix. Brazil is the one that preserved 66% of its nature untouched. Is the 15% of its territory with less than 0.5% of the native population. So we deserve respect. We need help, and we are open. Thank you very much. Have a good seminar, and let's keep in touch. Thank you.
Muito obrigado, ministro, pela sua apresentação ao vivo. Thank you for your words, sir. Thank you for being here, Minister Guedes. And it's great to see Brazil's development moving forward. Moving on for our second topic, economic. We're honored to have here, and I would like to invite to the stage Diogo McCord, Special Secretary for Private Disinvestment and of Economy in Brazil. Welcome. Thank you.
Good morning. First of all, I would like to thank to Apex very much for organizing this beautiful event. I'm not sure whether the video is ready to be shown. Yep. So please. That's all our real estate initiative in Brazil.
Young consumer real estate development potential in a country with the Brazil dimensions. At 8.5 million square kilometers, with 7,000 kilometers of coast and over 213 million people, Brazil is the fifth largest country by land and sixth world's largest population. The national